Welcome to Sorting Through the Junk Science, helping students and families separate fact from myth. I'm Lisa Hoffman, and I'm here with Emily Suh and Alan Zollman. And in addition to being teacher educators and educational researchers, the three of us also have 13 children and grandchildren between us. So for this presentation, we're approaching this problem of junk science from the perspective of how academics and teachers can help families help their children think more critically and logically. We believe many parents and grandparents want the tools to be able to help their children's critical thinking skill development. And this is an area of potential outreach for teachers and teacher educators. So before we go further, I'll let everybody introduce themselves. I'm Lisa Hoffman from Indiana University Southeast.
I'm Alan Zollman, also from Indiana University Southeast.
And I'm Emily Suh from Texas State University. So the COVID pandemic has revealed widespread public mistrust in science, and educators of all levels are trying to help address this issue and the associated need for increased scientific information literacy skills. Our presentation today will give you some practical phrases, activities, and resources that educators can use to share with families to develop children's critical thinking skills in these areas.
Like you, the high level of public mistrust in science and scientists disturbs us. STEM teachers at all levels can play a vital role in helping students realize and recognize junk science. As STEM educators, we have the expertise to talk about academic content, but the COVID-19 has demonstrated that both adults and children can benefit from stronger logical thinking and clearer understanding of science. We hope this presentation helps STEM educators bridge the divide between the research on teaching scientific inquiry and at-home practical applications. We wish to offer tips for teachers on how to support parents teaching these skills to their children at home.
Now, the critical thinking skills that students need to identify junk science are not science specific or even necessarily STEM related at all. Logical thinking skills can be developed throughout daily life and over time. So in this presentation, we suggest small steps that anyone can do to help encourage this skill development. As you likely know, the term junk science refers to inaccurate analysis and data that is used to skew opinion or push an agenda. Many different groups, including politicians, the media, lawyers, businesses, activists, governments, and even scientists have utilized junk science for their own motives. You may be familiar with the case a few years ago when the state of Utah was hoping that their scientists at the University of Utah had created cold fusion. And many people in the race to secure patents for the procedure ended up embarrassed and some jobless after the discovery was proved to be false. So there's a case where people with limited knowledge wanted to believe some science was true, but it wasn't. Ethan Siegel writes in Forbes Media that it can be a challenge to determine if information is junk science. No matter how dispassionate we attempt to be, we can't help but be colored by the biases of our preferred outcome. We can help our kids identify junk science in part by asking who is reporting the information, where and how the information was gathered, and whether the information considers all sources. So here's an example. One of my daughters a while ago asked me to pick up some odd items from the drugstore. She said she wanted to use them as a home remedy for acne. I told her I had never heard of that approach, and I asked where she had heard it. She said, I saw it on Pinterest. I reminded her that anyone can post a claim on Pinterest, and that if a miracle cure for acne was available, maybe dermatologists would know about it. And she said, no, this is real. I read it. People commented and said that it works. So there's an example of the importance of differentiating junk science and science. Now, of course, we support innovation in skincare, but this anecdote reminds us that even a highly skilled, capable thinker is not necessarily a discriminating consumer of information. Our children are coming of age in an era of social media, and they need intensive information literacy skills, including media literacy and bias recognition skills. And most kids are not currently learning that in schooling.
Whether or not our children choose STEM-specific careers, we want them to understand that information is created through a process, that research is investigation, and that searching for information is strategic exploration. Political commentator Fareed Zariqa warned against a US cultural obsession with STEM jobs by saying critical thinking is, in the end, the only way to protect American jobs. So stop and think, what does it actually mean to think critically? Critical thinking is a phrase that really includes several intellectual processes. It involves deciding what knowledge is relevant to a situation, evaluating information quality, and applying the relevant knowledge to make informed decisions. The critical thinking necessary for STEM also includes questioning others' thinking and recognizing contradictions and biases or admitting flaws in our own thinking. Schools recognize the importance of critical thinking from early childhood all the way to doctoral studies. Yet as career educators, we will be the first to admit that these are not skills that are adequately taught in most schools. In fact, many teachers aren't trained to teach critical thinking at all. So we encourage all parents to model and teach these skills at home. As parents, we remind our own children to stop and think several times a day to give them an opportunity to consider the natural consequences of their intended actions.
In the real world, there are common phrases that adults can use to help children separate myth from scientific fact. For example, what do you think? Why is that? Why questions require more critical thinking than what questions. Many times adults ask superficial what questions like, what causes global warming? Such questions can be answered with responses repeated from school. Doing this communication to children that knowing a short answer is Doing this communicates to children that knowing a short answer is adequate. This is a false sense of understanding. It shuts down children's curiosity. Instead, we recommend asking how and why questions, such as, how does burning fossil fuels cause global warming? Why should car manufacturers be concerned about whether their products contribute to global warming? Adults can foster children's deeper critical thinking by asking questions like, how do you know this information? How does your perspective differ from someone else's?
Another helpful phrase is, I wonder where they got their information. So one example here is asking your kids if the world is flat. This was considered a scientific fact up to the 17th century in many cultures. What sources of information will children use in determining their answer? Perhaps information they were given by a teacher, something they saw on TV, or their view out of the window. Do kids view a friend reposting on social media as equally or even more valid than a group of research scientists? We want kids to question the sources of their information, the possible bias of these sources, the resources these sources use for the information, and the analysis that was conducted on the information. Part of supporting kids developing critical thinking skills involves talking with children about how they evaluate information and helping them question their assumptions when they put more faith in the non-expert opinions of peers than in researchers or other experts. Helping kids understand what qualifies someone as an expert on a subject and understand where experts usually share their knowledge, that's an essential part of STEM education.
And there are phrases that do not support critical thinking in STEM education. Don't ask why, just get it done. In every generation, kids have rushed through their homework to finish quickly. It's normal for kids not to think critically about their homework. They just want to get it done as quickly as possible. Kids remember doing the homework, but they don't remember anything they learned from it. We emphasize that both the kids and the parents we empathize with both the kids and the parents from our own experiences. But children may learn more from asking why they need to do something. We want kids to ask why. We want supportive parents to encourage kids to keep seeking to understand the larger purpose of the homework.
Another phrase that's not helpful is, because I said so. So we have all heard exasperated parents utter this phrase. But what many people don't realize is that when we use this phrase, we're telling children to blindly accept a statement or command without thinking critically about the rationale behind it. So, what are some other options? A more constructive approach is to talk through the reasons we are telling the child to do something. This allows the adult to model critical thinking skills that are necessary for coming to a conclusion that we have asked a child to accept.
So my kids like to play in the river, and in some places the current is really strong. It's strong enough to push them pretty far downstream. Because they're fairly competent swimmers, we're not so worried that they'll drown, but we want them to stay together and with the family. So we're constantly reminding them, not so far. Usually after a few yards of floating, they stand up and they wade back against the current to our family. But one day, my oldest son decided that he was going to keep floating with the current. He got far enough downstream from us that he eventually, when he stood up and tried to wade back to us, began complaining about being too tired to wade or swim against the current. And finally, he had to get up out of the river, climb to the bank, and pick his way back through the brush in order to return to the family. He still loves floating down the river, but he doesn't let himself go as far anymore, and we don't have to yell at him quite as often. What he didn't learn from all of our warnings to stay close, he picked up along his long walk back to our family. There are several activities that can help develop critical thinking. For example, you should consider kids' odd ideas. Adults can support divergent thinking in several ways. Most importantly, we should avoid judging when children seem distracted by having too many ideas. When a child doesn't answer the way that we expect, it could be that the child is just considering several different interpretations of the question. An idea that seems odd or off topic to us may in fact be an important stepping stone to innovation. One of my sons needed to make a book for a homework project, and he asked us for a cardboard box, plastic food service gloves, glue, and a pair of scissors. He had decided to try and laminate his book, and he began by cutting the gloves open and gluing them onto the cardboard. Through trial and error, he discovered that a plastic produce bag, which is a rectangle, would be much easier material to work with, and that a glue stick rather than a bottle of glue would dry faster. Now, none of us would have considered this original method for laminating a book, and it was really difficult not to jump in with his divergent thinking. But along the same lines, we need to refrain from labeling children's ideas as brilliant or excellent when they're in the process of thinking through a variety of possibilities. In other words, we need to allow children their full thinking process without an adult weighing in unnecessarily.
Another helpful activity is encouraging kids to collect and record their thoughts and ideas. This encourages divergent thinking and is a way of showing children that we value their original thoughts. Children collecting their own ideas could take a variety of forms: sketching out ideas, jotting down brainstormed ideas, journaling, mind mapping, or even recording audio clips or video clips of ideas that come into their heads. Organizing thoughts can come later, but one way to support divergent thinking is to allow the time and the space and the reassurance that it's okay to have many ideas swirling around in our heads sometimes. Another activity or idea for a helpful activity is to spot bad arguments together. We all know that illogical arguments are commonplace in public discourse, but most of us don't learn how to identify when and why an argument doesn't make sense. Kids and adults alike can benefit from recognizing commonly used logical fallacies, such as a straw man argument or circular reasoning.
Other activities that can support critical thinking, for example, would you rather? Offering control choices allows children to make judgments that adults can accept. I often give my grandsons two choices, such as, you have $2 now. Would you rather buy the candy now or wait and buy the toy when you have more money? Neither option is bad, and offering controlled choices allows my grandsons to take responsibilities for their critical thinking. Later in the day, I asked them how they felt about their decision. Would they make the same choice the next time? Like many of our examples, this isn't STEM-related activity. Yes, everyday activities prompt kids to consider options, make decisions, and reflect on their choices, just what a scientist does. Another activity is playing truth seeking games such as Balderdash or Three Truths and a Lie with kids. Balderdash is a board game that requires players to differentiate between real and make-up definitions of words. Three Truths and a Lie is an informal group game that can be used with kids and adults. Everyone states 3 true statements about themselves and 1 lie, and the other players have to guess which statement is the lie. Each of these games presents misinformation that can be just as believable as the true information. Sometimes true statements can be most surprising. These games can serve as springboards for discussions about the importance of not accepting all information presented to us and why people often believe what they want to believe. Finally, consider extracurricular activities such as debate team or speech club. These activities help kids form logical arguments and communicate clearly and succinctly. Debate also gives kids practice in recognizing illogical arguments while thinking critically on the spot.
We suggest a few activities that can support these skills, or a few resources that can support these skills. One thing is we would encourage families to look beyond kit type of toys to open-ended toys that allow for divergent thinking. This connects to parenting advice about the importance of open-ended play. In the world of STEM, so many attractive kits are marketed for kids that we may not realize how much of our children's play involves following specific directions instead of thinking for themselves. While some kids enjoy paint by numbers or strict recipes to follow, we encourage adults to step back and make sure that our children's playtime isn't filled primarily with steps that are directed by adults. To develop these critical thinking skills, our kids need space and opportunity to solve problems. We also suggest resources that are available to teach media literacy. Organizations such as the nonprofit Common Sense Media has a robust website for news and media literacy. It's designed for parents and it includes articles, videos, and detailed answers to questions like, how do I start teaching media literacy to my preschooler? The Edutopia website also has a game called Logic Shrink, which can be played in a classroom or at home. And it allows children to find faulty arguments in real life media sources. We would also encourage teachers and parents to learn about faulty arguments together. There are now a variety of resources available. Books, we have a few mentioned on the slides, Fallacy Detective, Logical Fallacy Monsters, an illustrated book of bad arguments. And so we have some videos linked on the slide there that explain some common critical thinking errors to children. And more such materials are being developed all the time. During the coronavirus quarantine, I had set an informal goal of introducing some common logical fallacies occasionally at the dinner table. I don't have formal logic training, but it was fun to look for examples from daily life. And I was afraid the topic might not be enjoyable, but in some way this can help kids feel like they're learning a secret code. Children feel empowered when they uncover secrets about how people persuade each other. And months later, if a child hears a campaign advertisement on the radio and says, hey, isn't that guilt by association? Then you know it sticks.
We are not saying that parents should focus solely on logic and rational thinking. We aren't trying to dispel the role of St. Nick's, the Easter Bunny, or the Tooth Fairy. The child can believe in the magic of childhood while still growing into a critical STEM thinker. Aristotle said, it's the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. We can help our kids' judgment, asking them to vet their own ideas and arguments. To vet means to appraise, verify, or to check for accuracy and validity, allowing kids to express their thinking and then guiding them to reflect on the goodness of the decision can develop the skills to separate the science from the junk.